Welcome back to more FPL content. This will be a very popular time to activate the wildcard, so I'll be talking about the best 15-man squad using this chip. And on screen you can see the best clean sheet odds for the upcoming deadline. Manchester City are top, facing Burnley at home with a 54% probability. In second is Tottenham Hotspur, facing Wolves at home. Everton, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa and Arsenal complete the top 6. And in last spot is Burnley, facing Manchester City away from home. All of these stats are taken by the website fantasyfootballpundit.com. I'll refer to them during my deadline stream on Saturday. The same goes to my top 10 captaincy options, which you'll also see in the upcoming team selection video. And if you want to also have more videos on the channel for Fantasy Premier League, covering the best free hit team for Game Week 6 and the predicted lineups, then let me know down in the comment section below. And like this video, let's get it to a 200 on YouTube, and let's keep on pushing towards new goals like 37 for our subscribers. We're also looking to grow all our social media platforms. That includes my Discord server, the FPL League, Spotify, and also my Blue Sky Instagram and Patreon. So check out all those links in the description. The same goes for my Twitter or X as well. I hope to see you on Saturday for the next FPL deadline stream. There should also be a reaction over the weekend, and keep your eyes peeled for Matchday 2 content in UCL Fantasy with a best wildcard and limitless squad, my team selection where a chip could be activated, and also the deadline stream next Tuesday. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My overall squad value is 100.9 million, but in terms of spending power, which you can see using websites like FPL.team, it'll be approximately 100 million. So most people watching should be able to afford this, but if needed, I'll discuss some possible downgrades so you can afford the foundations of this 15-man squad, and I'll be considering multiple factors like form, fixtures, and also these swings coming up for the likes of Manchester City in Game Week 6. So certain clubs will be doubled and tripled up on, and I would still have this sort of balance in the attack and the defensive line. So you've got decent coverage from the top teams and some of the best assets in FPL for goals, assists, clean sheet potential, and defensive contributions. I'll start off with the 2 goalkeepers, and it really comes down to 2 of the best shot stoppers in the Premier League to really be your number 1 goalkeeper in FPL. It's extremely rare for me to recommend a Manchester City goalkeeper, but I think Donnarumma can make plenty of saves and get some bonus points in this Man City team. Over the years, when Pep Guardiola was maybe in his prime in the Premier League, we've seen the likes of Ederson and Ortega being rotated in the last couple of seasons, and we've also seen Ederson not really reach the heights of Alisson and other premium FPL goalkeepers like Pickford, because the saves and bonus points potential simply isn't there. Now, so far in his Man City career, he has kept clean sheets against Napoli in the Champions League, a 2-0 victory, and on his debut, it was a 3-0 victory for Manchester City in that Manchester derby. So it's a very good start for Donnarumma. He was booked for time wasting against Arsenal and made a mistake, I think, towards the end of the game, which allowed Martinelli to chip it over him for that 1-1 draw. But I think Donnarumma will get plenty of 7-pointers this season and be a decent asset. I know he costs 5.6 million, and you've got David Raya at the same price tag, but it's also a question of covering Arsenal and Man City defensively at the same time. And if you want to do that, I think going for Donnarumma and then 1 Arsenal defender is the best way to go about it. I'll show you later on, using the website FPL.team, an alternative which includes David Raya in goal and my favourite Man City defender at this moment in time, but the vast majority of them are suspect and also subject to rotation, whilst Donnarumma should start every single Premier League game for the foreseeable future. So I've gone for Donnarumma as the main choice in goal, and you've got 2 options as your backup in Darlow, who costs 4 million, and Martin Dubravka. The better long-term pick is probably Dubravka, but Darlow has better fixtures at this moment in time, and it all depends on the prognosis on Perry. We don't know enough about the full extent of that injury, but it may require surgery, and if that's the case, I think Darlow could be a solid long-term asset, get a few free pointers, and whenever Leeds keep a clean sheet, it could be 7 to 9 points for Darlow. He has been very impressive for Leeds United so far this season, and they got a massive win over Wolves in that 3-1 win, and Dubravka made plenty of saves himself against Nottingham Forest in that 1-1 draw, and if only I started him over Robert Sanchez, that was a swing of 7 points, which I'll discuss in my team selection. But let's now talk about the defenders in this 15-man squad, and this is very crucial to setting up the foundations for long-term success on the wildcard. Tottenham Hotspur rescued a point after being 2-0 down against Brighton. I just don't like that defensive double up in the long term, but it has paid dividends for the first 5 game weeks of this season, and Van de Ven offers better value than Pedro Porro at this moment in time. I still think Porro will outscore him quite comfortably by the end of the campaign, but he's not worth 5.6 million right now, and Van de Ven has gone up in price by several times for a reason, because he is offering that consistency, and he can get DEFCON on the odd occasion, but I think Spurs are worth covering defensively for the next couple of game weeks. There is a clear fixture swing though in Game Week 10, and if Aston Villa can get their act together, you could argue that Spurs might struggle even before that going into Game Week 8, but 1 or 2 clean sheets on the horizon is certainly possible, and Van de Ven offers decent Spurs defensive coverage, but I wouldn't go for Vicario in goal despite his decent FPL returns. He should have done better for that Ayari goal, and in the long term, he won't keep as many clean sheets as Donnarumma, David Raya, and arguably Jordan Pickford, who has such a high ceiling for a goalkeeper as well. But I'm going for a few premiums in this defensive line, and one of them is Gabriel. You could certainly cover Arsenal defensively with Raya in goal, Calafiori, Timber, and Saliba, but I still think Gabriel is the most secure in the long term, and Arsenal's defensive depth is very impressive to say the least. It was also the case last season, but you could argue it's on another level this time round with Mosquera, Hincapié, Lewis Skelly, and Ben White being the backups. So that could easily be the best back four for a lot of teams actually, but Gabriel is still my favourite. He should score the most goals in the Arsenal defence. He can score DEFCON from time to time, but it might be worth noting that Saliba is a bit more impressive in this regard, and in terms of baseline bonus, Saliba might also surpass Gabriel in the grand scheme of things, so you could certainly go for a different Arsenal defender like Saliba, but I think Gabriel is a bit more robust, and he has been available for a long time now, whilst with Saliba, he did pick up an injury problem towards the back end of last season, which saw him miss out in Game Week 38, and then he missed a couple of weeks during pre-season. And then we saw, of course, this little issue that caused him to miss the Champions League game against Bilbao and the victory against Nottingham Forest as well. And of course, he was subbed off against Liverpool in Game Week 3, which is where it began. Now, in the case of Gabriel, I'm well aware that in March, he did pick up that injury, which saw him miss the end of the season. But generally speaking, he has been available for the Gunners, and all the kind of yellow cards and reds have kind of been put behind him. He still has that in him potentially, a bit like Otamendi from Argentina, for example. Both of them have that sort of play style, but Gabriel has established himself as one of the best defenders in world football. He has also gone up in price to 6.2 million, and I think he's well worth that investment in the long term. Calafiori is just too injury prone for me to really recommend him, and Jurriën Timber does have Ben White knocking on the door if he can stay fit, because Ben White has had so many injury problems in the last couple of months, and that has been a big shame for the Gunners because he offers so much going forward. But the other defender I'm really advocating is Virgil van Dijk. Despite Liverpool having tough fixtures, they are bottom of the FDR up until Game Week 11, which I talked about in my reaction stream. Virgil van Dijk can score defensive contribution points consistently, and that's a rare trait for a premium defender, so I think he's well worth the money, and Liverpool will keep plenty of clean sheets this season, and I still think they'll win most of their games coming up, and they have a 5-point lead at the top of the Premier League table. He is my favourite Liverpool defender and also asset at this moment in time. Salah is still right up there, but he's not worth 14.5 million. Then you've got Gakpo, Ekitike, and Isak, who will all share minutes, and that doesn't seem too secure right now. So Virgil van Dijk is just a nice entry point and also coverage for the Premier League champions, and he'll be one of the highest scoring defenders by the end of the season. Let's complete this defensive line though with 2 more options, and this player has been a defensive contribution machine in Marcus Senesi. He has gone up to 4.7 million before the Game Week 5 deadline, and now going into Game Week 6, he'll prove to be very popular as well. A clean sheet is possible, of course, for the upcoming match, and he can still score defensive contribution points if that isn't secured anyway. So Senesi can kind of guarantee you 2 to 4 points in every single game week, and any clean sheet or attack and return will kind of double that score. He can also get bonus points quite comfortably for the Cherries. He was signed a couple of years ago, then he was benched on a lot of occasions last season, but I think he's a good centre-back. He was signed with a decent reputation from the Netherlands, and of course he has played for the Argentina national team on very few occasions, but I think he deserves more opportunities for the Albiceleste, and he's a decent defender in the Premier League. But there's one more defender to complete this backline, and I think it's worth going for a cheaper option. You don't need to go for a really expensive defensive line and then have Lacroix or Munoz, for example, and you might want to cheap this out a little bit. Mukiele has been extremely impressive when it comes to defensive contributions, and for Sunderland, he has been a big part of their defensive solidity, and getting that 1-1 draw against Aston Villa, despite going down to 10 men, was very impressive, and it goes to show how difficult it will be to beat Sunderland, especially at the Stadium of Light, and he's my favourite Sunderland defender overall. You've got Rufus in goal and Rinaldo Mandava, who was red carded. That was absolutely amazing for my FPL squad as well, but I think Mukiele is the best Sunderland defender and arguably the best at 4 million. You've got Goodmanson and Rodon, who you might want to consider, and Leeds are top of the FDR. So afterwards, I'll show you alternatives, and I will definitely highlight those Leeds defenders, but I think Mukiele is another good option, and Sunderland's fixtures remain decent. But let's now move on to the midfielders, where things will escalate, and this is very important to get right because the bulk of the points in Fantasy Premier League will be scored in this position. Another DEFCON machine is Moises Caicedo, who almost guarantees you 4 to 5 points from the get-go, and any goals or bonus points can also boost that score quite significantly. He is my favourite Chelsea midfielder at this moment in time, with Cole Palmer potentially missing out against Brighton. I'll keep you updated on any sort of injury news on that front. The same goes for all other Premier League teams going into the GW6 deadline, but Caicedo is a perfect 8th midfielder here, and you would sometimes be a bit uneasy about benching him because he can give you some really good returns, like we saw against West Ham, which was the only game where he failed to score DEFCON. He still scored in that match, and he's got 2 Premier League goals so far this season. So Caicedo has a lot of different routes to points. Don't expect too many assists, to be fair, but he can easily make that up with DEFCON, and I think it's worth going for that sort of asset who gives you the consistency. I prefer Caicedo over Reinders, but on this wildcard, there is the possibility to go for both of them and have that Man City coverage, and also doubling or tripling up on the Citizens, facing Burnley at home, and their fixtures are still quite decent over the next 5 game weeks. So I think Reinders is probably my second favourite Man City asset, but that is between him and Phil Foden, and it all depends on your budget and what you do with other positions, because there is a clear difference in price of 2.4 million, and Reinders will offer better value in the long run. But let's now go to the more exciting picks where the bulk of the money will be spent, and Bruno Fernandes is one of them. Before Game Week 5, where he scored against Chelsea and delivered 10 points, he was on the thumbnail of the last wildcard squad, and he was highlighted in a lot of detail because he is a talismanic figure on penalties. He is playing deeper but can still score DEFCON from time to time and get goals and assists from open play. So if you're thinking of Reinders and Caicedo as being, magnets to points and having so many different routes to getting them, I think Bruno Fernandes is on another level when it comes to that. Obviously with DEFCON, he won't be as consistent as Caicedo, but I think he just has that sort of ability to get points one way or the other. And even if he doesn't get any goals or assists or DEFCON, if it's a 0-0 draw, we have seen it last season, and on many occasions he can still get bonus points. So Bruno Fernandes is a brilliant FPL option. He might not be to the same level in terms of output as he was when he first joined Man United and set the Premier League by storm, but Bruno Fernandes will be a consistent FPL asset, and there have been a few blanks along the way, but then he produces massive 10-pointers, which kind of compensates for it. So I think Bruno Fernandes is a solid option and quite underrated for the captaincy when it comes to Game Week 7, albeit Sunderland have been very impressive so far this season. But the best midfielder in FPL has been Semenyo. Even in that blank against Newcastle, so to speak, he still scored DEFCON, which was very surprising to say the least, but he can just get points from different avenues as well. When Justin Kluivert isn't on the pitch, he will be on penalties, as we saw against Brighton, and he is fixture-proof. That 15-pointer against Liverpool caught everyone's attention, and he's already gone up by 0.7 million in price, so he now costs 7.7 and he's well worth it. So Antoine Semenyo, who's a bit of an FPL troll for me in the previous campaign, but ultimately it comes down to these tough fixtures. Just start Semenyo and don't overcomplicate it. With this 50-man squad, you might have some benching dilemmas from time to time, but I still think it's possible to build this sort of structure, have a good option on the bench if needed, and it will really pay off in the long term. But the final midfielder might be slightly surprising, but he was also discussed in my recent wildcard video. That is Ndai. He is my favourite Everton midfielder, and that's back-to-back games where he has scored DEFCON. That's a very underrated trait for a winger, and he can also score goals and get assists quite regularly. Now, I think that's one key aspect he can improve with the creativity and the assists, but I think that will definitely improve this season, and we saw that assist, of course, for Idrissa Gana Gueye's goal against Liverpool, and ultimately it was a great strike, and Ndiaye did a nice layoff, but it was kind of carried by the finish. But Ndiaye will be very consistent. He was booked against Liverpool and still scored 6 points there. I was very happy with that return. It was probably the only good thing about my game week, which goes to say a lot about my FPL season so far. But let's complete this 50-man squad with the free forwards, and a lot of money will be spent in this position, and that includes the best FPL asset at this moment in time. There is no debate right now that Erling Haaland is number one in FPL, and that goal against Arsenal was very impressive to say the least on the counter. We've never seen Man City play that sort of way, but I think that's the best way to approach a match against the Gunners, and Reinders and Haaland combine very well. They could also do so against Burnley. I think they'll rotate massively in the Carabao Cup against Huddersfield, so Haaland and Reinders should get a rest there and get plenty of minutes against Burnley and in these upcoming Premier League matches. With the triple captaincy, by the way, if you aren't activating the wildcard in Gameweek 6, my recommendation is to put the triple captaincy on Erling Haaland facing Burnley at home. You will have opportunities with the likes of Gyökeres in Gameweek 10 and Cole Palmer in 9. You've also got Haaland as well in future game weeks facing Leeds and Sunderland at home. In the first half of the season, Mohamed Salah will always be solid, but by that stage of Game Week 13 to 15, we could see a lot of Premier League matches mixed with other competitions like the Carabao Cup and the Champions League, and there could be a rest or maybe reduced minutes for some of the best assets in FPL. So I think now is a great time to go it for Erling Haaland. You've got the expected minutes, which are really high, and as good as Burnley have been recently, they've really struggled against Man City, losing the last 10 matches against the Citizens, and some of them have been absolute batterings. I think Man City will win by 3 or 4 goals. Erling Haaland will be heavily involved, so all the kind of signs point towards a very healthy return by the Norwegian robot. He scored 5 goals over the international break in a single game, and he isn't blanking in any match at this point in time. So I think Haaland is the go-to asset. His only blank, of course, came in Game Week 2 against Tottenham Hotspur, but even in that defeat against Brighton, he scored, got maximum bonus points, and he's worth 14.2 million or 14.3 now. I think he is probably offering better value than Mohamed Salah, despite having that disadvantage of being a forward as opposed to Salah being a midfielder. But next up is Joao Pedro. He is still worth it in my opinion, and he's only going to be a better FPL asset if Cole Palmer is available, but that could also improve his chances of being on penalties, especially if Enzo Fernandez isn't on the pitch either. And Joao Pedro has been very consistent for Chelsea since joining, and they were massively handicapped by that early red card from Robert Sanchez in the first 5 minutes of that game. And I still think Chelsea will win against Brighton, and that will be Joao Pedro's former club. He will probably have a point to prove, so to speak, and these players always have motivation to score against their former clubs, and Joao Pedro's fixtures are still quite decent over the next 5 game weeks. He's fixture proof, he can get a lot of bonus points, the odd assist here and there, and plenty of goals. So Joao Pedro is still worth 7.8 million, and you compare him to Chris Wood, Ollie Watkins, and all these other options, I think he's going to be the 3rd best striker in the long run. But just behind Erling Haaland, I am going for Victor Gyökeres, who has had no service in the big games against Man City, Liverpool, and Man United, but we saw against Leeds and Nottingham Forest, which are poorer opposition, if you give Gyökeres chances, he's going to score goals. He just won the Gerd Muller Award for the best striker in Europe, and I think Arsenal, all the onus and all the kind of responsibility is on Arteta. There are certainly things that Gyökeres can do better. His touch hasn't been good enough, and his link-up play, but I still think if you give him chances, he's going to score, and we haven't seen enough shots on target in the big games. In fact, he hasn't got a single one, not a single shot overall. The XG is going to be basically 0.00, but whenever he got those opportunities, he bagged them against Leeds. He even created one himself with a solo goal, and against Nottingham Forest, he was in the right space at the right time, and not enough Arsenal players do that. So once they get clicking, and especially with that fixture swing from Game Week 7 onwards, facing West Ham at home, that's where Gyökeres can start bagging some massive returns on a consistent basis and be a captaincy option over the likes of Salah and Erling Haaland. But more often than not, I'll recommend going for the big boys when it comes to the captaincy, and Erling Haaland will be the go-to for the next couple of months. And for Game Week 6, there is no debate about it whatsoever. Erling Haaland facing Burnley. He has scored a hat-trick against them in his career, and it could be another one come this weekend. And in terms of triple captaincy opportunities, this might be the very best for the first half of the season. The captaincy might be crystal clear, but let's discuss the starting 11 and other alternative picks just in case you can't afford this squad. So Donnarumma is in goal with Dubravka as the backup, and this could easily be Darlow, and I think having a Leeds United defensive coverage could still be viable. I know some people might be asking about Calvert-Lewin up front as a third forward, and if you want to go there with the fixtures, that's fair enough, but we've seen this kind of pattern before with Calvert-Lewin. He has been very erratic in front of goal for many years now, and it has been a while since he was a consistent FPL asset for Everton. In that defensive line, Van de Ven, Senesi and Virgil van Dijk would start. That means Gabriel is on the bench. The same goes for Mukiele. The only uncomfortable thing about this, of course, would be benching Caicedo and Gabriel. Those two could easily get a good return in Gameweek 6. But Bruno Fernandes, Reinders, Semenyo, Ndai, Gyökeres, Haaland, and Joao Pedro is a formidable front line, and you could make the case of benching Gyökeres this week because I think Newcastle Arsenal will be low scoring, and starting Caicedo and just banking in those 4 or 5 points against his former club. But Gyökeres' ceiling will be far higher than Caicedo, and ultimately you'd want to start Gyökeres as often as you can. But in these sort of bigger games or the tough sort of matches which are very cagey, Gyökeres has been ineffective, and of course there are things he can improve, but I ultimately think Arsenal need to create more chances from open play. The expected points is 58.7. If you can't afford this team, you could still consider a 5 million goalkeeper, even Vicario, for example, but I'm not really in that sort of camp. David Raya over Donnarumma is another consideration. Timber over Gabriel, or going for Gvardiol is another choice to cover Man City defensively. That's the way I'd go about it if you don't want Donnarumma between the sticks, but I'd highly recommend Senesi. There is also Mark Gay, Chris Richards, Lacroix, and Munoz. Take your pick from those Crystal Palace defenders. In the long run, Munoz is probably my favourite and the most exciting, but he's also the most expensive at 5.6 million, so bear that in mind. But Virgil van Dijk is by far the best Liverpool defender, and in terms of their assets overall, he is number one at this moment in time. In the midfield as well, you can go for Phil Foden over Reinders if you have the funds, but that requires shifting other players around as well. Mohamed Salah and Haaland could be fitted in to the same squad, but you'll probably have a very weak bench and also a few sacrifices in the starting 11 as well. Dewsbury Hall over Ndai is something else you could consider, and even cheaping out your 8th attacker and go for Josh King, and that means you can start Caicedo every week, for example, or Reinders. That's something else you could entertain. But let's discuss some alternative picks so you can see them on screen. Rise in for Donnarumma, Gvardiol in for Gabriel, Senesi and Van de Ven keep their spots, and Mark Gay is on the bench. The same goes for Goodmanson, and remember, you can go for Darlow over Dubravka, but it might not be the best long-term pick, and Kudus does make it in here. He has a great record against Wolves, and if you want that Spurs attacker, Kudus will be the most consistent, and he'll also have that creativity. He got 2 assists against Brighton, and one sort of big topic and discussion point in my deadline stream was that Kudus' record against Brighton is probably worth starting him in such a fixture, and he delivered for those that went there. And I think sometimes you have to look at these sorts of records because it gives you an insight into which teams these players like playing against. Now, you've got Semenyo in here, that goes without saying. Foden is also taking the place of Reinders essentially. There is no Bruno Fernandes with this squad, and Cody Gakpo offers you a Liverpool offensive coverage, but his minutes haven't been secure in the last couple of matches, being subbed off early against Atletico Madrid and Everton. Gyökeres, Haaland and Joao Pedro keep their spots, but if you wanted to go a bit different, Jean-Philippe Mateta is still fixture-proof, and he is probably in that top 5. Evanussen and Waldemada could also be considered, and they will offer great value. I'm just a bit against tripling up on Bournemouth with Senesi, Semenyo and Evanussen. Otherwise, I'd be more keen on the Brazilian. And if you are looking short-term, Richarlison is still a decent punt for the next 3 game weeks, and Calvert-Lewin, if you really want to go there and endure that sort of pain, then so be it. The reward might be brilliant and you'll be thinking you're a great FPL manager, but at the same time, Calvert-Lewin can really bring you down, like Ollie Watkins has done to me personally. But I think with the forward line, another one you might even want to entertain is Ekitike, but you've got Isak knocking on the door, and that's a situation I'd rather avoid. But what you've seen in this video are plenty of alternative picks and some big dilemmas, of course. And I've currently gone for Donnarumma over Raya, and that means going for Gabriel over Gvardiol, but Jurrien Timber could be considered, and for now, he should start every single Premier League game, but Ben White is back in the squad. We saw that against Man City. You want to consider these things as well in the long term. And with the wild card, you don't want to book in too many transfers. So you can afford a few short-term punts like Richarlison, but in the grand scheme of things, this could backfire massively. Xavi Simons is another one who I would deem as a punt. Kudus is a safer pick, but ultimately Xavi Simons' ceiling will be higher, and he played extremely well coming on as a substitute in a central position, and there are plenty more options where that came from. Some assets haven't really delivered so far this season, but we'll see signs of that in the coming weeks, and before they even return, I'll be picking out those players who can start becoming those sort of difference makers in every single position, and they can be included in your normal transfer plans and wildcard squads to win your mini leagues and rise up the rankings. There will be some people watching who aren't convinced and they really want Salah and Haaland simultaneously, and you could go for something like this with David Raya in goal, Van de Ven, Senesi and Tarkowski, who is extremely underrated and he is scoring defensive contribution points in every single match. Salah, Caicedo, Semenyo, Ndai and Reinders remains a very decent midfield with Haaland and Joao Pedro up front, and on the bench there's Darlow, Calvert-Lewin, Richards and Mukiele, but there are some big downgrades and sacrifices like no Gyökeres. You've also got no Arsenal defender, but that can also be kind of compensated for with David Raya in goal. There is also no Bukayo Saka, who could also be considered over the coming weeks, and if Cole Palmer is available, that's another option for you, but I think with the constant injections he's getting, I think that's probably worth avoiding right now, because we're going to see him being subbed off and have his minutes managed on many occasions. And I do like the midfield still. That hasn't suffered too much with Salah being brought in, but I think the forward line is definitely much worse, and the defensive line as well. Now you can go for Mark Gay for those that have enough money in the bank over Chris Richards, but that's not really a massive upgrade in my opinion, despite the difference in points right now. I think it's over 10 with Gay getting a few goal contributions, but it's still a good squad in the grand scheme of things. You might want to consider Saka in the coming weeks. That could definitely be a difference maker, and for those wildcarding in Game Week 7 or 8, I think Saka will prove to be very popular in those specific match days. But right now, you can still go for Salah and Haaland and have a good wildcard squad, but I feel that the other ones are more balanced, and in the long run, they'll score more points in most game weeks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or find it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell to always up to date on my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Stay tuned for next week with Matchday 2 content returning on the channel with the best wildcard and limitless squads. The same goes to my team selection, where a chip will likely be activated for the Champions League. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair access to my videos, priority applied to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next deadline stream, and keep your eyes peeled for the upcoming team selection and UCL Fantasy videos for Matchday 2.